Hey there, Savvy Swap listeners. Or should I say listener? Because for the next little bit, it's just going to be you and me. Today, we're going to be looking at Ray Kroc in the 2016 film The Founder. We're looking at the film through the lens of negotiation. And a quick side note, I've used the text Essentials of Negotiation, written by Lewicki et al. In 2020 to get the scholarly information in this podcast. I'll let you know when I use direct quotes, but know that the juicy definitions and the like are not my own. So a quick synopsis of this film is Ray Kroc is a traveling salesman in the late 50s who convinced the McDonald brothers to let him create the first McDonald's franchise. This is a story about Ray doing whatever it takes to get to the top. Spoiler alert, he becomes known as the founder of the McDonald's Corporation, hence the title. The founder gives us a lot to work with in the context of negotiation. I'm going to be talking about BATNA, hardball tactics, conflict management, social value orientation, emotion, verbal and nonverbal communication, power, and ethics in the film. Let's get started. Knowing what alternatives you have is a crucial step in the power that you hold during a negotiation. A BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's important to understand your BATNA inside and out before going into a negotiation, because it's the option that you're nearly guaranteed to go with if you and the other party can't reach an agreement. Having a weak BATNA is a recipe for future regret from the agreement that you and the other party make. Throughout the film, the main character, Ray Kroc, gives a perfect example of the outcomes of having a weak versus a strong BATNA. In the beginning of the story, Ray is a traveling milkshake machine salesman. When he gets the opportunity to be the franchising manager, his BATNA is, well, to be a traveling salesman again. This BATNA puts Ray in the position to accept an unfavorable contract, only getting 1% of new franchise profits. And he later discovers that this isn't enough compensation to support the cost of his labor. Ray's BATNA gets pretty swole near the end of the film. At this point, he owned all the land that new McDonald's franchises operated, and he had subsequently started using a McDonald's Corporation letterhead on his documents. Let's listen to the difference that a strong BATNA makes from the film.
Franchise Realty Corporation. What is it? I have no clue. Apparently, Ray Kroc is president and CEO.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
Well, if you really want to know, I'm a tad miffed.
Well, why? What seems to be the problem?
Franchise Realty Corporation.
What about it?
For starters, would you mind telling me what it is?
Oh, nothing really. Just a little something I created to provide leasing services, lend support to our new franchisees.
You know full well you can't do something like that without first clearing it.
Now, why would I need to do
Because
that?
as your deal plainly states, any and all changes must be agreed to in writing.
Except it's not a change.
Excuse me?
It's not a change. It's a company. It's its own separate company, which puts it outside your purview.
Anything relating to McDonald's is within our purview.
Let me explain something to you. You boys have full say over what goes on inside the restaurants. But outside, above, below, your authority stops at the door and at the floor. Alright?
Ray's BATNA, if his contract was terminated, was to sell the land that all of the franchises operated. This BATNA would provide a great return on investment and a terrible outcome for the McDonald brothers. His BATNA gave him power. The power of BATNA is astronomical. Here we can see that a weak BATNA leads to blindly signing contracts, and a strong BATNA can make the opposing party bend to your will. Let's talk about hardball. When you want to persuade the other party to agree to something that they wouldn't normally, you can use hardball tactics. Hardball is what is dominantly portrayed in books and films. However, in real life, hardball shouldn't be your go-to. These tactics are generally frowned upon by many negotiators, as they can easily come off as offensive or backfire. Hardball that we see in the movie is near the end of the film, when Ray is buying out the McDonald's brothers. He uses the nibble, which is an uncommon hardball tactic. The nibble is when near the end of a negotiation, a party asks for a small concession that hasn't been previously talked about. The nibble has to be proportionally small compared to the deal, small enough that saying no wouldn't be worth losing the rest of the deal for. Ray uses the nibble by saying that the 1% company profits in perpetuity would have to be on a handshake basis. He then confirms that they will get their profits, but it's just for his finance guys. The McDonald brothers accommodate Ray by accepting this deal. And by the way, the brothers never saw a dollar of the profits. Let's take a quick listen to the nibble in action.
Our client agrees fully with your conditions of sale, with one exception. Your 1% cut of future corporate earnings will have to be carried out on a handshake basis.
It's my investor group.
The nibble works because it comes in at the very end of a negotiation. The other party isn't expecting it, and therefore they're more likely to agree to your terms. Though be careful with this one, because it can seem as though you're negotiating in bad faith and that you had this in your back pocket the whole time, which may be detrimental to future relationships. Personality has a big impact on negotiation. Quote, personality is a stable tendency to think, feel, or behave in certain ways that can be identified or measured. Consider, for example, the trait of extroversion versus introversion. You probably know some extroverted people who are constantly gregarious, and you probably know some people who are typically quiet, reserved, and less outgoing. End quote. We're going to look at two ways of studying personality from the film here: conflict style and social value orientation. Conflict is an inescapable part of negotiation, and we all have ways that we default to manage conflict. Conflict management styles exist on a spectrum of assertiveness and cooperativeness. Knowing the conflict management style that you lean towards will help you better prepare for negotiating, as different situations will favor different styles. If you want to find out your conflict style, Google search, quote, conflict style quiz, end quote. The first tip from the University of Colorado is a really good quiz to see where you land on the spectrum. The conflict management style most often seen in the film from Ray is competing, which is high on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness. This is because he began to own all the land that McDonald's operated. The stakes for losing his contract were low. He has a high BATNA, remember? When good old Ray was in trouble for using the letterhead, he took on an unmistakably competitive attitude with the brothers, almost challenging them in a way.
Your authority stops at the door.
Social value orientation is another really interesting way to gauge your negotiation personality. Social value orientation is how much you care about personal outcomes versus others' outcomes in a situation that involves interdependence. These orientations are defined as pro-self or pro-social. Pro-self means that you're not concerned with the other party's outcomes. You want to gain as much as possible. Pro-social is where you want yourself and the other party to gain as much as possible. It's a more collaborative approach. When Ray is discussing terms of divorce with his lawyer, he's showing a true pro-self orientation. He is focusing on his gains and his gains only in this scene.
When trying to quietly settle a divorce, the first thing to ask is, what will she want? And is her request reasonable and equitable? In terms of marital property, there's a house, car, savings and checking accounts, insurance.
Just give it to her. House, car, insurance.
What about the business?
Nope.
Ray, you have to understand that she's...
Let me explain something to you. It's never going to happen. I would sooner die than give her one share of stock in McDonald's.
This is pro-self behavior at its finest. Ray is so concerned with his financial gains that he is unwilling to find a solution that is integrative or even one that has mutual gains. Mood and emotion. Have you ever given it any thought as to how your moods and emotions impact how you negotiate? Quote, surprisingly, questions such as this received limited attention from negotiation scholars until the last decade or so. End quote. But recently there has been some research to discover how mood and emotion impacts how we negotiate. Before we can get into that, we have to talk about the difference between moods and emotions. You can differentiate the two based on their specificity, intensity, and duration. Mood is mild in intensity, not directed at anything, and is long in its duration. Emotion, however, is an intense feeling that is brief and clearly directed at someone or something. Emotions are separated into positive and negative sides. Positive emotions are usually clumped together under the term happiness. Happiness. Ever heard of it? Negative emotions are further separated into broad categories of anger and anxiety. Anger is what we're going to focus on here. Ray, for sure, is a certified hothead. Anger signals irritation, and it can be useful because it shows the other party that you're less likely to engage in concessions, which can lead to the other party settling. However, it's important to note that anger works best when you're in a position of power. If you're not in a position of power, pop pop, make sure that the authority sees your anger is very justifiable and grounded in legitimate reason. But let's be real, it's rare that yelling during a negotiation, like good old Ray here does, will get you anywhere. Let's take a listen as to what using anger as a tactic looks like.
Let me explain. Be real small, right along the bottom, very discreet.
We're just not comfortable with the notion of turning our menu into an advertisement.
See, it's not an ad. It's sponsorship.
It's distasteful.
It's free money.
There are plenty of things we could do to make a quick buck, but that doesn't mean we should.
Loads of restaurants do
Well,
this.
we don't.
Why not?
Because I have no interest in indulging in that sort of crass commercialism. It's not McDonald's.
I didn't realize I was partnering with a beatnik.
I'll have you know I'm a card-carrying Republican.
Yeah, but you could have fooled me.
He hung up again.
He's just a little excitable, that's all.
See how they didn't view his anger as legitimate at the end? Because he's always excitable. He's often ready to use anger to get what he wants, and this emotion has a clear negative impact on his relationship with his business partners. Have you ever heard the term, "It's not what you say, it's how you say it"? This saying is talking about how we deliver communication, verbally and non-verbally, is more important than the words coming out. And this is some really fascinating stuff I'm about to talk about here. So, about language. Language exists in two levels, the logical and pragmatic level. The logical level in negotiation is for your proposals and offers. Example, I'd like a 5% salary increase. The pragmatic level in negotiation is your semantics, syntax, and style. For example, to be able to get out of the rental market, I need a 5% salary increase. The pragmatic level of language includes things that can be hinted at or inferred from what you're saying. An example of the levels of language in the film is when Ray is explaining his reasoning for having the company profits be on a handshake basis. On the logical level, that's what he's asking for, it to be on a handshake basis. But on the pragmatic level, what can be inferred is that it's completely out of his hands and the deal cannot go through without the brothers accepting it. Let's listen to the clip and see if you can identify the levels of language.
Our client agrees fully with your conditions of sale, with one exception. Your 1% cut of future corporate earnings will have to be carried out on a handshake basis.
It's my investor group. The financing is contingent on leaving that out of the contract, and unfortunately, this deal just doesn't happen. It doesn't get financed unless you leave that out of the contract, because unfortunately, that's a deal breaker for them.
The pragmatic level of language is really interesting here. The way that Ray flattens his tone and quickly speaks to the reasons that it has to be on a handshake basis really makes it sound like there's so much that's making it out of his control. Now let's talk about nonverbal communication. There is so much communicated through it. Imagine you're making a sales pitch to two people. Both of them are nodding their heads. One of them is leaned forward, hands interlocked, and they're making eye contact. The other is leaned backward, arms crossed, hands not visible, and they're looking behind you. Even though both of them are nodding their heads in agreement, the rest of their nonverbal communication tells you that one of them is much more on board than the other. The nonverbal communication in the scene where Ray is buying McDonald's from the brothers, Ray uses his body language to convey an important message, that there's nothing he can do. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to do my best to describe it. When Ray is explaining the reasoning that the profits have to be on a handshake deal, he breaks the solid eye contact that he was previously making. He then interlocks his fingers, puts his elbows wide on the table, and looks down as he's talking, shaking his head. When I saw how he delivered this, I thought Ray was conveying that he was powerless to this part of the deal, that there was nothing he could do to put that part of the deal in writing. If he had maintained his previous body language, sitting tall, making eye contact, it would have left a lot more room for the brothers to say no. After Ray says that it has to be handshake, he immediately stands up and extends his hand for the handshake. This is a powerful assume the close moment. because now he's standing above the brothers, looking them directly in the eyes. My jaw literally dropped when they accepted Ray's terms. The power that you hold when going into a negotiation has a huge impact on the outcome. Power can be acquired in 4 different ways: position-based, informational, relationship-based, and contextual. Position-based power is from holding a certain position in your organization or communication structure. You know how your boss or your landlord has a type of power over you? That's what position-based power is. Position-based power shows itself through legitimate power and resource control. Legitimate power comes from holding a title that comes with responsibilities and duties that give you power over others. Resource control comes from money, raw material, labor, and time. In Ray's case, he has legitimate power from resource control. After he begins buying all the land that McDonald's operates, the brothers have to bend to his will. Ray now has the power to shut down all of their restaurants. Contextual power comes from the greater situation or environment that a negotiation takes place. In this case, Ray's contextual power comes from his availability of his strong BATNA. If at any point he decides to get out of the business, his BATNA is, again, to sell the land that all the restaurants operate. The way that Ray went from having next to no power in this film to having an abundance of it shows the difference that power makes in a negotiation. He went from begging and pleading with the brothers to straight up telling them how things were going to happen. So for our final segment of our talk today, let's talk about ethics. Why are they important in negotiation? Before we start, let's get the definition down. Quote, ethics are broadly applied social standards for what is right or wrong in a particular situation or process for setting those standards. They differ from morals, which are individual and personal beliefs about what is right or wrong. End quote. So basically, ethics are societal standards about how to act, and morals are what you believe yourself to be right or wrong. In the negotiation context, there are 4 broad categories of ethical reasoning a person may take. These are important to distinguish because which one a person favors gives you a clue as to where lying may occur. The categories are end result ethics, duty ethics, social contract ethics, and personalistic ethics. End result ethics is when your course of action is determined by the end results you want to achieve. With end result ethics, you weigh the pros and cons of achieving your desired outcome. Believing in end result ethics means that you may do whatever it takes to get your best possible outcome, like lying about your BATNA. Personalistic ethics is when you follow your convictions along with your conscience to determine what is right. Following your own standards, you may engage in deception or lying to get what you want. Whichever approach to ethical reasoning you or someone else takes greatly impacts the behavior chosen to a negotiation. So the burning question: which approach to ethics does Ray use? I would argue it's a combination of end result and personalistic ethics, but mostly end result. Throughout the film, we can see Ray doing whatever it takes to get to the top. When he saw McDonald's, he knew he had to have it.
I remember the first time I saw that name stretched across your stand out there. It was love at first sight. I knew right then and there I had to have it. And now I do.
We can see here that the end result was at the top of his mind, and his personal beliefs told him that it was rightfully his. He lied to new franchisees that the business was his creation. Let's listen to an example of Ray's end result in personalistic ethics.
When did you start it?
Sorry?
What year did you start McDonald's?
Year? I started it in 1954.
He deceived them too by making the McDonald's Corporation when he started buying plots of land. Although Ray's ethics were certainly questionable, he ended up getting exactly what he wanted in the end. So there you have it. We've talked about a lot today. The founder gave us a lot to examine in negotiation. BATNA, hardball tactics, conflict management, social value orientation, emotion, verbal and nonverbal communication, power, and ethics. Ray's hot-headed, hardball way of doing business isn't suggested, but hey, sometimes you've got to go against the grain to come out on top. I'm Cole Reinbold. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that this podcast probed you to do your own research on the breadth of negotiation and how interesting it really is. And one more quick shout out to Essentials of Negotiation, written by Lewicki et al. For the information used in this podcast. Thanks for listening.